Hello everybody and welcome. I'm just going to share my screen a second so that you can see the PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you, and I'm just going to, as I'm doing that, let you know that I do have a household full of people, so hopefully this won't be too noisy, but if it is, it's all happy families in the background, as I think we're all getting nowadays with Zoom. So thank you and welcome to Empowering the Bystander talk. I would like to very first, oops, for some reason this isn't, there we go, thank you. I'd like to acknowledge appreciate, respect, and we're humbled by the traditional owners of the lands upon which we all meet and upon which we all come from. I know it's an international conference, so I acknowledge the lands from wherever it is that you might be coming from across the world. I personally am on Jagera and Turrbal land here in Brisbane in Queensland, and one of the things that we always like to say in the work that we do with Screenmate and Mate is that we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, particularly in this land, because they hold the memories, traditions, cultures and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the land that we're on today. And importantly, a greater knowledge and appreciation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditions of kinship and family can help to reform much of the societal disconnects we're currently facing as a country in order to build a safe and equitable society into the future. So we honor the ancestors, your ancestors, my ancestors, and the ancestors of this land. I also would like to thank the Melbourne International Games Week for having me give this talk, and also would like to deeply thank the Victorian government and Film Victoria in particular for supporting us with creating this particular talk today. And sponsoring a pilot program of Screenmate, which is the training that we do, which I'll talk a bit about later. So a little bit about me. I am a filmmaker, a writer and a director, and also a playwright. I write in a whole bunch of genres, but my most beloved genre is feminist horror, which you've got a few pictures here. This is some of my work, including I have a part of the Dark Whispers anthology, which is Australia's first ever all-female directed horror anthology, which is out doing its festival circuit as it can during COVID, as it is. I also am the chair of an organization called Women in Film and Television Australia. I'm one of the co-founders as well. So we're a not-for-profit that is dedicated to achieving gender equality in the screen industries for all women and non-binary people as well. Now, I also wanted to just let you know that I also work on a global scale with the board of directors of Women in Film and Television International. So that's fairly recent, that I just started last month. This board is across 6 different continents, and WIFTI represents over 50 chapters across the world and 20,000 women. So there's some really interesting work being done in that space. And all of these women that you see here in the picture in front of you do incredible work in their own spaces, Bangladesh, Caucasus, US, Greece, Sweden, Nigeria. So I feel like I just want you to know that I come with that knowledge as well of a bigger picture of gender activism across the world in the screen industries as well. But today I'm here talking about the power of bystanders to create grassroots cultural change and shift the discussions around gendered violence in the games industry. So I figured when I wrote that's quite a large, it's quite a large thing to talk about. So what I'm going to do is just break this down through this talk section by section. So the first section I want to talk about was the power of bystanders. When people ask me what I do, one of the things the easiest way is I sort of say I do bystander training. They're like, well, what is that? I say, well, look, the easiest way for me to explain it is that basically often what we have and we're used to is knowing that there's a person who receives the thing and there's the person who does the thing. So there's the person who does the thing and the person who receives the thing, which is what we've got a picture of there. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that picture there, which is obviously a very harsh a person about to hit somebody else. So it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that. The thing that's being given and received, that could be something, it could be racism, it could be ableism, it could be homophobia. There's a range of things it can be, and it can be a slight, it could be a joke, it could be something that's almost hard to detect, but there's something happening. And you know that there's the person who's giving it and there's the person who's receiving it. Now, what we've also got is all the people who sit around that. And those are the bystanders, the people who see, hear, or know of the thing. Now, the thing with this is that, well, what bystander training does, and what I do as a facilitator of Griffith University's Make Bystander training program, is that I work to activate, we, with our training, work to activate the bystanders so that you're able to become more effective and empowering yourselves and interrupting behaviors. So that's really kind of the gist that I usually give people about what I do. And I think the important thing to note about it is that currently what happens is we've got this idea that the person who's doing the thing has to stop doing the thing, which actually doesn't happen a hell of a lot. Then there's the person who's receiving the thing, who then has this responsibility to stop, say something, do something, report something. Like, there's a whole bunch of pressure on the person who's receiving the thing, who usually is the person who is in A, the most trauma, and B, often is in a disempowered situation because of the nature of the power relationships between the two. That's what the research shows us. So that's why when we start to activate the bystanders and all the people who sit around this dynamic, we start to find a way of supporting, a way of unraveling the knot of that dynamic and reducing the expectations particularly upon people who are receiving the behavior, to actually have to, do something, say something, be something, often in a way that is that might not necessarily fit with what they need from a healing perspective or from a personal perspective. So that's the rough picture of what bystanders, what bystander training is. Now, I mentioned that I do work with Griffith University, and I facilitate this bystander training, which is a very powerful course. That we take that course into prisons. It goes into something like 14 or more universities. I recently just delivered to 100 students at VCA, Victorian College of the Arts. And so we take it to mining companies. We take the bystander training to a whole range of sectors in Australia. And it originates from work that happens in the US as well, which is still continuing with the Jackson Katz's work called MVP, which is a Male Violence Prevention Program. So we have a lot of evidence base and research behind the training that we do. And if we didn't have that, then it wouldn't be, we wouldn't sit in the level of impact and power that we have when we deliver the training. So we get a lot of feedback from people all across the sectors about how this affects their organizations, how it affects the way they relate to each other, and just the way that they think about the issues of gendered violence. So with the power bit, like we said, this is about the power of bystanders. So the thing that we say in terms of power is that everybody has the capacity to do something. And why people don't do something is actually very well researched. And I'm just going to show a few of those ideas, which it's quite possible you've had this feeling before. So we've got someone else will do something. This isn't my business. What if this person turns on me next? Trying to keep yourself safe. What will people think if I do something? I want to do something, but I don't know what. People are often afraid that they're going to do the wrong thing. There's a whole bunch of very, very good reasons and very human reasons why people don't do something. They don't actively prevent or interrupt behavior when they see it. So you can see that one of the most legitimate, they're all legitimate reasons. And the most commonly expressed one that we hear is fear. That people are basically afraid of, getting it wrong, as I said, afraid of getting hurt, or if they turn on me next. There's a whole range of reasons. And basically, the thing that we say in the trainings is that we never expect someone to go past what their feelings are. We always say, look, listen to your gut, respect that. It's essential that you understand that every day, every situation, every different scenario, or it all has different intersections with how you are. You might not feel up to saying anything that day, so you have to find some other way of working. You might not be able to actively intervene when something's happening. You might not be able to be in a position at the time to say anything. But there are ways around this, and that's the interesting part about Bystander and why I do the training, is because the fact is that there's actually a whole range of ways around the obstacles, the very human obstacles that prevent people from doing something. So there's a lot of really interesting research has done around how to navigate those blockages. And one of the metaphors that I use, I sort of say, look, there's a door over there. Let's say that door over there is the door where everybody speaks up when something doesn't feel right to them. They do it straight away, they do it in a really effective way, and we have this constant flow. Let's say that's a door over there, which is a door where there is no sexism, there's no ableism, there's no homophobia, there's, you know, we treat each other well, with respect, all the time, and when we see that doesn't happen, we correct it straight away. That's the door. And I can say, look, that door is amazing. You know, this is what the door looks like. Here's a picture. I can say, look, here's the door handle looks like this. And I can give you a diagram that says the hinges open that way or this way. And so when you get there, make sure you push, not pull. I can give you a special thing for your hand that says, here's how you got to just crush this thing. Like, keep doing this. And you got to have a really strong hand. So when you get to that door, you're going to wrench it open. I can do all of these things. But if I don't talk to you about the barriers that are invisible, that sit between where you are and that door, then you won't necessarily notice when you bump into them, get stopped by this obstacle, and end up wondering why you haven't made it to the door. So these things and these speech bubbles here, they're elements that that in a training, for example, we would learn how to navigate. But they are navigatable. That's not even a word, but they are able to be navigated. Is a better way of putting it. They are able to be mitigated, to be recognized, to work around. You know, as I said, we don't push past fear. Nothing that anyone can do will stop you feeling fear. If your body is feeling fear, it's for a reason. But what we can do is help you to know other ways to work, so that you can have a whole range of tools in your kit that will help you to interrupt behavior. And so really the power of bystanding, what it lies in, is the power to interrupt. And that's to interrupt a whole range of behaviors, including racism, including sexism. And the other thing is that although it doesn't have to be immediate, you can certainly, and this is one of the things that we talk about a lot, is that you can certainly, bystanders are still effective if they work after the event. But it can be immediate as well. And the other thing that that is very powerful about bystander action is actually very simple, in the fact that anyone can do it. You don't need special equipment, you don't need special gear, you know, no matter who you are, no matter what your status, color, skin, your abilities, like there is something that you can do. And so what the training looks at is what those somethings might be. So that's the power of bystanders section. The next section I wanted to talk to you about is to create grassroots cultural change. So sexual harassment has been illegal in this country for over 30 years. Right? So there's a law, and there was a lot of people who fought and worked really hard to make sure that that law came into being, and that it existed and had some teeth. But that was 30 years ago. And as we know from, for example, Weinstein, John Burke here in Australia, that even though it sits there in law, that doesn't stop sexual harassment from happening. When the Me Too movement really kind of hit its stride and kind of went really global in 2018, so with Women in Film and Television, what we did is we created something called the Safer Workplaces Strategies. And that was the first screen industry-wide discussion about sexual harassment and assault. And it was a really important conversation that we had to work really hard to make sure everyone could get in the room, because this was near the end of the year. We wanted to make sure that December didn't kick along and suddenly we were into January and February, and then the discussion meanwhile was stalled. So we pushed really hard to create this forum, and we had it was at the Australian Film, Television, Radio School. It was sold out. So it was free tickets, but it was booked out. And we had a counselor there so that if anybody needed to discuss stuff that came up for them, that was possible. We made sure there was really good nourishing food for everybody, so that if they felt upset, sometimes it's just nice to feel nourished on a very human level. And we had Kate Jenkins, the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner, as our keynote speaker. We also had people who were from the Deputy Police Commissioner of New South Wales was there, and we also had lawyers who worked in this space, and a lot of other people who specifically work in the areas of gendered violence, and we had this really important discussion. Since then, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, has also had launched the landmark National Inquiry into Sexual Harassment in Australian Workplaces. And that culminated in the report Respect at Work, which was released earlier this year. And what that revealed is, even though it's been illegal for 30 years, sexual harassment is still a problem in this country. And I know from the work I do with WIFTI that it's a problem globally. And the thing is that the vast majority of sexual harassment continues to go unreported. So the Respect at Work report found that only 18% of people who experience sexual harassment actually report the behavior. And there's a whole range of reasons that sit behind that as well, that range from not knowing who to speak to, not feeling like you're not going to be believed, not wanting to have the, I guess the fear of the stigma and the immense amount of pushback that might come back, and the trauma that might be then, not only re-triggered, but then added to on top of that. So there's a whole range of reasons that sit underneath this statistic of only 18% reporting. But the interesting thing is that what we found is that reporting has actually increased, and statistics coming out of Victoria increased like 6% and I think 8% in other areas during COVID. And so this is primarily women reporting. Which is what statistics usually are around sexual harassment as well, and gendered violence generally. And so because the reporting has increased, like for some hotlines overwhelmingly so, for some areas, there's a couple of things. It could be the size of the problem that's increasing, which is entirely probable. We're all online. And just because we're online doesn't mean that there isn't harassment that can happen in a virtual space. Or it could also be that there's an increased comfort because people are at home and they're feeling safer, and you don't have to be in the space with that other person in a physical space, and so therefore there's more likelihood of reporting. But what we don't know that yet. But what we do know is that definitely under COVID, there was an increase in reporting of sexual harassment in Australian workplaces. So a few years ago, the Committee for the Economic Development listed the barriers to women's equality, and the top of that list was workplace culture. So this isn't a distanced concept when we talk about workplace culture. It's not like a government law, which is something that sort of is made at a level of play that, unless you're in politics yourself and you're actually in the rooms that are having the discussions, you're not necessarily going to be feeling like you're influential in the government policies or the laws, but they still exist, so there's that feeling of distance to it, even though they can have a very powerful effect on your lives. And it's not an overarching piece of organizational or guild policy, for example. whose clauses you may not know by rote. Again, can be very useful. Highly recommend people be aware of these, whatever your organizational or company or guild policy is. They're very important frameworks, but they also don't always, just because they exist, automatically create a change in workplace culture. So when we're talking about workplace culture, we're talking about something that's very concrete and it's very immediate, because it's made up of me, it's made up of you, it's made up of how we treat each other, what we say or what we don't say to each other, what we do and what we don't do, what we allow or don't allow, what we speak up about, what we don't speak up about. So we could say that this is made up of social behavior and also of norms. And you'll know yourself that if you go from one company to another company, or from one workspace to another workspace, that one of the things that we learn when we first arrive somewhere, anywhere, it's just human nature, is to start looking for the norms. Like, what is going on in this space? What's normal? Like, what, there used to be a show called, it was like an earlier version of Pranked called, oh my gosh, it's gone out of my head now. It was like a funniest home videos sort of thing. Oh my gosh, it's driving me nuts now. Anyway, one of the things that they would do in this show is that they would do strange things, get people to do strange things and see what other people would do about them. So I remember this distinctly, this elevator that was being, everyone was just getting into this elevator. And what they did was the people who made the show went, okay, I want you all to get into that elevator, all you actors, and you're all going to turn around and face the back of the elevator. Because everyone in an elevator, that you always face the doors and you kind of look up to see, or when it's going to go ping and it's your floor. So they got everyone to go in, turn around, do the opposite to what we usually do, and face the back. And then they filmed people coming in to see what they would do. And so you could see them, the doors would open to the elevator and the person would come in and they'd be like seeing everybody's backs, and this is strange. And within seconds, they're just sort of like, okay, so clearly we have to face the back of this elevator. That's the norm in this space. So they would turn around, and when the elevator opened, basically everyone had their backs to the elevator door. So it was that idea that we as humans are so quick to be highly attuned to what other people are doing. And I guess for better or for worse, the thing is that it means that we almost, there's parts of us that just automatically will find what needs to be done in the space. But it also means that equally we have the capacity to start shifting those norms through our own behavior, through our own consciousness around it. And so the thing about social behaviors and that might normalize or groom for gendered violence is that if we as bystanders, not the person who's doing the thing or the person who's receiving the thing, but all the people who sit around, who equally create workplace culture, if we interrupt the thing that's happening, we interrupt that social behavior, and we interrupt those norms that normalize or groom for gendered violence, then what we're doing is the work of changing culture. And that's a very powerful thing to do. And so whenever we interrupt, we're also discouraging the doer and we're supporting the receiver. And that's a powerful thing to do as well. One of the things that we know from the research, from people who have gone through or are going through sexual harassment or worse in workplace, or bullying or racism in workplaces and workspaces, is that there's this immense feeling of loneliness, and that the mental health repercussions of that are massive and ongoing. So whenever we're interrupting something, the quicker we get it interrupted, could be a joke, could be a range of behaviors. And one of the things that we look at in the Screen Mate Bystander training is that we specifically look at how to to support people in interrupting those behaviors, but also how to recognize what something is, to give you shared language and shared knowledge. I'm a great believer in shared language and shared knowledge. And if you know what something's called, and if you know what that something which has this name means in a bigger picture, it makes it easier to identify that feeling. When you feel like something's not right, don't know what it is, when you have a name, it helps you to say that's the thing that's not right. And as bystanders, it also means you're able to call something out in a way that's very precise and nuanced, and can actually then give other people and empower other people to have that shared language and to have that shared knowledge as well. So that's the thing that we talk about, is the grassroots culture change. And why do I say grassroots? I say that because that's how culture happens. That's where culture happens. It's at our grassroots level. It's at the level of human interaction. It's not the level of policy. It's not the level of government. It's not the level of remove. It's the level of where the rubber meets the road, where I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. We're watching other people interact with each other in whichever way that is. In our homes, in our workspaces, where we go shopping, where we go to the cafe, those places, that's grassroots work. That's where the grassroots culture is created. And so therefore, my interest is in grassroots change. In other words, I'm interested in the change where one heart talks to another heart, one mind talks to another mind, and we connect in a way that we are allowing ourselves space to talk about this issue, talk about what's going on for us, talk about what's going on for other people, and look for ways to shift it. I'm particularly interested in grassroots work because, and not to say I'm not, as I said before, not very interested also in the importance of policy and laws, but because I want to see things filter down to the level where we, as creators, particularly as creators in such influential spaces, are able to have really good discussions and really strong awareness about what we want and how we want to see our work, how we want to see our world, how we want to create with each other. So the other thing that we talk about in this talk today is shifting the discussions around gendered violence. So in order to do that, we have to talk about some pretty basic things. Like we have to have a real understanding about what the terms are that we're talking about. So first of all, I'm going to ask you this question. What is violence? And if anyone has ever worked in the non-violent direct action space, like we're seeing with, for example, with climate change, big protests, and there's this question all the time, well, what's violence? Like, is it violent to write a slogan? Is it violent to write Black Lives Matter on a sidewalk? Is that violence? Is it when does something become violence? And so I think it's a really good conversation, and we're skimming through a lot of important things today, which I really encourage you to take the time to have the discussion with somebody else around this. Ask them, what do you think is violent? But the thing I'm going to use here is that basically a violence is an act, and that could be words, that could be something that's done physically, emotionally, fiscally, but the point is that the act causes harm. So the thing to really look at upon when we're looking at the question of what is violence is what is harm. And that's an important question again to unpack. Like, what is harm? Some people might perceive one thing as harm, some people not. Where's the space to work at that? Where's the space to unravel that, to really have a look at that discussion? And so what we say here is that the question to look at is who decides what is harm. Given that we have power inequities, which we know exist in society, not everyone's, if you've got a boss, if you've got a CEO, if you've got somebody who's financing your project or whatever, there's power imbalances, and that can exist on a gender level as well, societally. And so therefore the question is who decides what is harm. And so what we say is like the person who's receiving, when we go back to that thing, the person who's giving and the person who's receiving, it's not on the person who's doing the thing to decide what is harm. The person who's receiving is the person that gets to decide what is harm. Often people don't even realize how much harm has been caused, that they have caused, or the impact of that harm. And so it's really important that when we talk about harm, that we really have that discussion about who gets to decide what is harm, and that we really center that around the person who is the receiving, not the person who's the doing. Because the Weinsteins will always say, it was okay. What I did was okay. I didn't do anything wrong, right? So we have to really make sure that we have that conversation. Which really leads us to this idea about intent versus impact. And the metaphor that I use a lot is quite a simple one. And I use this a lot around racism. I'm a woman of color. My mother's Indonesian. My father's white Australian. I grew up in Indonesia. And I noticed when I first came to Australia, I was quite surprised, I suppose would be a way of saying it, when I first started really hitting racism in my brothers as well, and people saying things and doing things to us that were just felt bewildering. And some of that was, I guess I wouldn't necessarily unintentional, but I would say that the understanding of impact was not very strong, which is probably a really nice way of saying it. So the metaphor that I've always used is that I'd say, if you're stepping on my foot, and you don't notice you're stepping on my foot, or you notice but you don't think it's you're used to stepping on people's feet, whatever it is, and I say, excuse me, you're stepping on my foot, and you say, sorry, what are you saying? And I say, you're stepping on my foot. What do you mean I'm stepping on your foot? You're stepping on my foot. Like I might have to really say this a few times to really get someone through, like, you're stepping on my foot, you need to get off. And then that person can choose to get off, or whichever. There's something to happen from there. But the point is that I get to actually explain impact. And of course, there's a whole discussion to be had about that. Like, there's a lot of work to explain impact. So this question of what is violence, that is actually a very big, nuanced, and important question to be asking, and an important question to be listening to the answers for, and listening specifically with what harm is there, who gets to decide what harm is there, and what's the impact of that harm. And this idea that the person who is receiving gets to decide what is harmful to them is something that sits within a lot of protocol and policy. And I'm just going to quickly pop this one up here. So post the kind of Me Too movement globally exploding and raising I guess awareness or a light on something that was always there, the SPA, Screen Producers Association of Australia, and NIA guilds put together a Screen Industry Code of Practice. And so some of you might already be aware of this, but this is just a section that I've taken out of it, which basically defines what sexual harassment is. And I've highlighted here the things that specifically say that something is unwelcome, it's unwanted, and you can see unwanted goes twice there. And so that idea of like, who gets to say what's unwelcome? Well, the person who's receiving the harm. Who gets to say what's unwanted? The person who's receiving the gift in this case. Who gets to say what's unwanted? The person who's receiving these multiple requests to go out on a date. That's who gets to say that, right? So this idea of who gets to talk about what harm is embedded in policy. And if you look down at the bottom, sexual interaction, flirtation, attraction, or friendship, which is, and I put this in green, invited, mutual, consensual, or reciprocated, is not sexual harassment. So it's really understanding this ideas, and of course this goes straight to the heart of what consent is. Again, another massive, very, very important conversation to be having repeatedly, really. So then we talk about the concept of, so I'll just go back here, of gendered violence. And we talked about violence. So gendered violence, it's quite, apparent in the words there. It's violence that has a gendered nature. So when we talk about, for example, rape or sexual harassment or domestic violence, we are talking about situations that are dramatically more likely to occur to a woman than a man. And that's not to say it doesn't happen to men. Of course it does. And all violence is something that I personally, and also within the training, the bystander training, is that we oppose. But statistically, we have to look at where the statistics are. And when we're talking about what gender violence is violence that is, if you were a woman, you are more likely to receive that violence than a man. And we have to really be clear around the fact that not only is that the case, but also that the people who are doing the thing are also more likely to be men, including if it's a man who's receiving the violence. Now, I've been to like a lot of conferences, I've been to a lot of forums and panels, and what I find is that, and I'm not alone in this, and those of you who are working in this space will understand this as well, is that generally you mostly get women at these conferences. And if I have a panel or I'm giving a talk or whatever, we've tried lots of different ways, like how do we get more men to come to listen to this conversation? And this is a fundamental issue of seeing gender violence or violence against women as a women's problem, as if there we go, I've put this one here, as if the issues is nothing to do with men or children. This is that's what we're seeing. That's what we see over and over again, is that the conversation often happens, and a lot of the lead proponents in this, I'm sure it's probably not too different in this in your industry as well, in your sector, in the games industry, is that you do see a lot more women doing the work around women's violence against women. So I don't know, I just always kind of keep that in mind, because what it means is that when we're talking about shifting discussions, is that we have to start shifting our focus, and shifting who's having the discussions and how we're having those discussions. Because of course men are in the equation. Of course this is a men's issue as well. And I guess the thing even more than that is that we have to shift this discussion to violence against anyone being a human and a justice issue. It has to be something that we all need to pull on together and work with together. So when we talk about bystander action, it's about what we can all do, what each one of us can do, not just the women supporting women or men supporting men or women. So, it's like we have to understand that we need to all be in this equation. We need to all be working towards changing grassroots culture. And that's why I really that's one of the things that I really appreciate about bystander action, is that anyone can participate if you're a bystander. Now, the other thing that I've got in here is that I said, as I talk about in the games industry. So the first thing I want to say is that I deeply appreciate your industry. I deeply appreciate this sector. I found this great picture here of these two girls, which I really love. I come from a house that is full of gamers, including my 85-year-old mother-in-law, who's just awesome. I adore her. She's one of my best friends. She actually built her own computer and only uses Linux. She's like this really modern woman, and she loves to game. And so she particularly actually stay up till 3 a.m. playing Minecraft, building houses. But she also has a whole bunch of other games that she plays, board games, and one that's called, just going in my head, June's, I see, like a mystery game, and she spends a lot of time on that, where she shows me, like, this is my island that I've built, and look, here's my houses that I've got, and I've earned these trees, and I've earned, so there's just a lot of joy that's brought into my household. through the games industry. And I really want to acknowledge, and I deeply appreciate as well the great work that's done in this space around justice and equality. And I know particularly in Melbourne that there's very active proponents who are working very strongly towards gender equality and gender equity and justice. And so I really want to say hats off, thank you, and I'm hoping that this work that I do can work alongside the work that you do as well. And so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and the questions that I'm going to ask are kind of in the knowledge really that there's no industry in the world that exists outside of the wider social inequities and pressures, including sexism, racism, ableism, and other isms, homophobia, etc., transphobia. So just being aware that because that's the case, it's impossible that this industry doesn't sit within that those pressures and fissures as well. So the question I want to ask first of all is, has anyone here who's listening ever felt marginalized, unsafe, or less than because of your gender and or intersectional aspects of who you are? That you can't, it's just who you are. I was at a workshop recently where this was asked, and honestly, I started to cry because this question was asked of the screen industries, but it was also asked of the arts widely. So there were people in that session who were visual artists, people in that session who were theater makers, dancers, people in live performance, and they were all people of color. And this issue was very strong straight away. So then the other question that was asked was, and I'm asking you now, have any of you ever witnessed someone else being made to feel marginalized, unsafe, or less than because of their gender and or intersectional aspects of who they fundamentally are? And again, what we're talking about here is conversations. What we're talking about is the questions that we really need to keep grappling with and asking and talking about and listening to each other about. So I think what we really want to be doing in this is shifting, and in those of you who might work in the gender violence sector will know that there's a metaphor that's used a lot, which is of cliff. So that we have the people at the bottom of the cliff, and we're all trying to support people at the bottom of the cliff, which is essential work. When someone's fallen down, they are in trouble, they need help. But there's also the people at the top of the cliff. So what we want to do is stop people falling off the cliff, right? That's the prevention work. And so what we really want to look at is shifting into a prevention discussion, which is what is happening kind of globally as well. So this prevention discussion means that we have to start looking at drivers. There's our prevention there, and so there's drivers. And again, what I'm talking about now in this not very long time are things that each one of these could be tunneled down in a very deep way. So okay, let's look at inequality in the workspace. So that's like the basic part of who's working around you. Who do you work with? Do they all kind of look like you? Are they all the same gender as you? Or like what is that? Just having an awareness of what and who is in your workspace, right? And then the other thing that we know is a major driver of gender inequality, of gender inequity and gender violence is rigid gender stereotypes. So, who does what work? Who is even, and of course in games, it's like, again, who's a gamer? Who's a games designer? Who does what work? And what is a male audience versus a female audience? Like all these ideas about what are rigid gender stereotypes. What space is there for gender nonconformity, for gender diversity? Like what is sitting in that space? So these questions and these areas are really important. And the thing with bystanders is that bystanders can work in these spaces as well, because bystander action is about interrupting and questioning. So it's not just about you've seen something happen and you want to do something, that's absolutely essential. What we saw in that beginning kind of image that I had of the person who gives and the person who's received. But there's also this capacity for bystanders to interrupt and question these drivers as well. And I have a friend of mine who is an amazing, wonderful person, human being, and theater maker. And I know that he went to work at an organization, and what he noticed as soon as he came in, and he called it on the very first day that he started work, because he's got a lot of courage like that, is he said, why is it that you've just hired me, I'm a man, and that the only woman that's working in this office is on reception? And they were quite taken aback at this, this, he was a person of color as well, this person of color, and calling them out so quickly on the very first day of work, when theoretically that's the person with the least amount of power. So there are ways that we can interrupt and question as bystanders, even to these deeper questions. So I guess the key messages that I've got for you today is that everyone has the power to be someone who does something. In fact, at our Mate Bystander conference, we actually had little things that went around, bracelets that we gave out, which said this: be someone who does something, and so you can really support each other in that as well. And so the thing around being someone who does something is that it supports you. If you've ever seen something happen and not done something, and that's a feeling, it's a horrible feeling. I've had it multiple times where I've seen something, I've not known what to do, and the moment's passed, or I've seen something, the moment's passed, and it's preyed on my mind for sometimes years later. Thinking, what else could I have done? Why didn't I? What? All of those questions, and it's not a pleasant feeling. And so the thing about training to be able to kind of listen to that voice and work with it, it means that you're able to live a life that's true to the values, the values that brought you here today. That's the values of kindness, equity, justice, compassion. And so bystander work in and of itself, it's not going to shift structural and systemic inequalities of itself. No one thing will. But what it can do is it can interrupt patterns at a grassroots cultural level in the places that you live, love, and work. So that's my talk about the power of bystanders to create grassroots culture change and shift the discussions around gendered violence in the games industry. If you are Victoria based, I know that there's people from all over at this conference. I'm at the at these, what we call them now, virtual spaces. So we do have an upcoming ScreenMate bystander training. So ScreenMate, and I probably should have explained in the beginning, is it's the bystander training that WIFT, Women in Film and Television, and Griffith University got together with. Griffith University has Mate, and so we got together and created ScreenMate, which is Australia's first industry-specific bystander training. And so we've got one running on the 22nd of October. If you're interested in that, please do contact me, and I will make sure that my email gets put in the chat. But it's katrina@wiftaustralia.org.au. Katrina@wiftaustralia, WIFT-australia.org.au. And this is exclusively for Victorian participants. So if you're interested in one and you're not from Victoria, please let us know. But either way, I am really grateful to talk to you today, and I hope that there's something of use to you that you could take away. One of the things that I'll say here is that, end with this lovely quote from Ava DuVernay: there's a direct line between art, imagination, and justice. And I think that's the things that we also hear, no matter what part of the sector you work in, no matter what element it is, we are creating. It's a business, but it's also art. Like, we're creating images, we're creating stories, we're creating really profoundly important cultural tools, and cultural problems, really, cultural tools are the best way to work out cultural problems. And so I love this quote from Ava DuVernay. So really lovely to spend time with you today. I hope you have a great time with the rest of the talks and other things that are going on with Melbourne International Games Week, and a pleasure to talk to you. Please feel free to contact me if you have any other questions. Thank you.